Hello everyone, my name is Alicia Jackson. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and today we're going to talk about how to recognize when you're in some negative thinking patterns, like how to notice that for yourself. And we're going to label a few of instinctual negative thinking patterns that we do get into. And I want to clarify that, all of that in a moment. But before we get into it, of course, subscribe to my channel. Go ahead and do that. Thank you so much for those who are returning back. So let's get into it. So when I'm saying negative thinking patterns, I am talking about things that instinctually we do, and they usually come from like a childlike place inside of us. And so when you think about it, when we're in a childlike space in our minds, are not thinking big picture or have coming from a logical place. It's coming from like an emotional place. And it's normally like a very all or nothing kind of space that we get into. And so we want to kind of look at some of those patterns and talk about them. And so we can kind of notice for ourselves, so we can be mindful of it, because that's the first start. That's the first step, like actually recognizing what's happening when it's happening. Okay. So one of the first things, and we usually call this cognitive bias, but it's ignoring all the good or ignoring the good. So our brain pays more attention to the negative things than the good things. And this is why practicing gratefulness and gratitude is so important, because you're really like restructuring your mind to focus on the good. And why our brains do that is, the negative things hurt really, really bad. So if you get 100 compliments, but somebody says like, ooh, I don't really like your cooking that much. It's, kind of bland. You could do something. You're like, oh, but everybody else liked it, but they didn't like it. I wonder why they didn't like it. They said I didn't, then so your brain starts to like dwell on that and focus on that instead of focus on everybody else who said you did a great job. So that is one of the ways you can kind of focus and know that you are in a space where you're ignoring all the good stuff and focusing only on the negative things. And noticing that, and then figuring out, okay, what do I do to shift it? How do I shift it? Okay. Another way or pattern that we can sometimes get into, that get stuck, is when we kind of blow up things that are small and make them like really big, even though they're not. They could be like the worst thing ever. So I'll use this as an example because it's like a teenage example. Like if you remember or recall, if you're an adult or if you are a teenager, if your parent will tell you to wash the dishes, you're just like, oh, I can't stand washing the dishes. And so you think about that, that's like a very even like big statement. Just like, I don't like washing the dishes, but I'm going to do it. Like, it's just like pushing through it, even though in the moment it feels just like this big, huge thing. Like, it's just so aggravating. Yes, it is. And it's inconvenient because you want to be doing other things or something you just don't like doing. And at the same time, you got to do it. So it's just making sure we're not exaggerating, something that is small and making it super big, just because, our feelings sometimes can really make us feel like something is really big when it's not. It could be really big to us in that moment, but learning how to soothe ourselves when that happens. Another kind of pattern that we can sometimes get into is fortune telling. Now, fortune telling is how we think about the future. And it's usually when we're in a place of like fear of the unknown, which is big. Fear of the unknown causes some anxiety, causes some, oh my goodness, I don't know what's about to happen. And so what we normally do to prepare ourselves and to make sure we're ready is we try to think about the worst case scenario, right? Like, what's going to happen if this happens, or what's going to happen if that happens. And so fortune telling says, like, I know what's going to happen and it's going to be bad. And it's like, well, we don't even know. We don't know. We actually don't know that it's going to be bad. But our mind kind of tells us that to prepare us for it. And it causes a lot of stress. It causes a lot of anguish. And it causes us to respond in a way that maybe not be the best. So that's a way to kind of recognize, oop, we're in a, oh no, am I fortune telling again? Am I predicting the future and I don't have any evidence that it's going to be that way? That is a way that we can know and tell, like, I've done it again. I've done it again. And to correct yourself in kindness, because again, this is something we instinctually do, and it's usually out of a place where we're trying to be ready, trying to protect ourselves, and trying to figure things out. So no harm, no foul. Okay, so when you're doing this, when you're in the moment, you're catching yourself, remember, practice some kindness. Okay, we'll do maybe like 2 more. Okay, so how to notice that you're in some negative thinking patterns. So another one is mind reading. Now this one does happen a lot, I've seen, where people can believe that they know what someone else is thinking when they really don't have enough information. Like, oh, I know why they did that, and it's because of this. And it's like, how do you know if they didn't tell you? We don't know. But we do mind read. I think we put a lot of what we would do on other people, and that is not the case, because everybody has different experiences, different perspectives, different reasonings, and all of that, and we don't know. This happens a lot even with couples. We don't know what the other person's thinking until we ask, and they tell us. So ask, hey, why'd you do that? And hopefully they can give you some insight, and it can help you get some clarity, between you guys. So that's another kind of negative, I won't say negative, just not a healthy thinking pattern, not the best practice. But we do this a lot. So we're maybe going to dig in a couple more. I know I said just a couple, but we're going to keep going. So another way that we can kind of get stuck in a pattern of unhealthy thinking way is setting the bar too high. Sometimes we have really, really high expectations of ourselves, and then we put those same high expectations on other people. So sometimes we think that we have to be perfect. We have to be perfect in everything we do, and if we don't do it, we're no good. Like, we are not, we don't have value. We use really demeaning words like stupid, or incapable, or I just can't get anything right. Everything I do is wrong. I always mess up. This kind of language. And we make mistakes. I mean, we are human beings, right? We know that logically. And so we have to remind ourselves that when we do make one, it's okay. It's okay. So making sure we realize that and remind ourselves of that. Another pattern that we can get into is like labeling, right? And so I'll give you an example. Like, so if having like a negative belief about yourself in one area means that all of you is bad. Well, if I don't do well in my school, then I'm, all of me is bad. If I don't do well in this area, then, and it just like, it's a grand sweeping, thing. And so some of these patterns you see even in culture, to how we interact with each other. If we see that one person is bad in this area, then they are bad in, all areas. This person mess up on their job, then they must be a horrible father. They must be a horrible, a horrible son. And that's not the case. We are so complex. We are so complex. We are complex human beings. We just are. And sometimes when we're coming from that childlike space, because we've learned, that's kind of where we learned how to initially navigate the world as a child. So from that childlike space, our brains weren't able to experience like nuance and understanding and how individuals' lives shape up. Sometimes we make the assumption that everybody's life is just like ours, and then we come to understand, like, oh, other people live differently, and we get to engage with the world and understand different people's walks of lives, different cultures, all of that, and that all encompasses like how we see the world. And so it's not all just one thing shapes us or makes or breaks us, because if that's the case, then we're all in trouble. We are, because we are human. We're human beings. We're gonna mess up. We're gonna contradict ourselves. We're gonna make mistakes, and mistakes is how we learn. And one mistake doesn't make or break us. Okay, do two more. I promise. All right. I keep saying a couple more. Two more. We're gonna do. One I thought was really good. Feelings as facts. That's kind of a pattern of negative behavior that we get into, or negative thinking that we get into, where we think that because we feel something, that it must be true, and that is not the case. Or because we think something, that it must be true. I won't even say that. It's just something for us to be curious about, and for us to navigate and kind of see what's happening, right? Okay, just because you feel it doesn't mean that it's true. It is real. It is valid. You have a valid reason to think and feel the way that you do, and they are real. They're not make believe, right? But they may not be factual. And so if they're not factual, we have to kind of address that in a way that you see fit, or in a way that you work in with your therapist, or have processed with them to reassure yourself and to reconcile within your system. So definitely, feelings are, again, real, valid, just not always factual. Okay. All right. So the last, I promise, I said two more, and this is the last one that we're going to talk about today, is an unhealthy pattern, instinctual pattern that we can get into: self-blaming. Man, oh man, self-blaming is very, very common. Blaming yourself for anything that goes on around you, even if it has nothing to do with you. And we do this with other people too. We blame ourselves for anything that goes wrong, and it's not the case. Oftentimes, and you've maybe heard me say this in previous videos, blame is so complex. The word that I like to use, other than blame, is just accountability. So accountability, and when something happens, there are a lot of people and things that are accountable to that. There are cultural things that are in play. There are systems that are in play when things happen. And so just because something happens around you, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's all your fault. If you come in the house and you see someone crying, or someone in a bad mood, it doesn't mean it's because something you did. They could be experiencing something outside of them, or something that's they're struggling with on the inside. It could be something that someone said to them via social media. Who knows? It could be anything. We don't know that. And so we have to make sure that we are not blaming ourselves for everything that happens all around us, because that is a lot of responsibility to take on. Okay, so these are just some ways that we can kind of notice and take into consideration how we are in some spaces that are unhealthy, aren't the best, right, in our thinking patterns, and just being mindful of them. Just being mindful. That's what we're doing first. Next video is going to be how we can figure out and adjust them when we do notice them. Okay, so see you next week, and of course subscribe to my channel. Take care, everybody. Peace.